Thank you, Chairman Kelly, for holding today's timely hearing. Before I move into questions, I just want to emphasize a few key points for my constituents back home who likely aren't following the OECD negotiations as closely as some of the tax community in Washington, but whose lives could be impacted by this. And I want to go back to the initial reason for the Pillar 1 discussions, as you've all said, were started with the intent of modernizing tax rules for the digital age. And the U.S. specifically entered into the discussions with the goal of reaching an agreement to remove discriminatory taxes, the DST taxes, on American companies, specifically American innovation, being enacted by several foreign allies. But the Biden administration chose to leave Congress out of the negotiations, and what we're left with is a Pillar 1 deal that has failed to achieve its original and its fundamental purpose, eliminating harmful digital service taxes, we're referring to them as DSTs, that threaten American jobs and will likely send U.S. tax revenue overseas. And because the Biden administration has chosen not to consult with Congress throughout those negotiations at OECD, I think today's hearing is an important opportunity to get the message out to the international community that Congress has serious concerns with Pillar 1. So I hope they're paying attention. For this deal to move forward, and I'll just maybe ask Mr. Bunn to confirm this, this cannot move forward unless the Senate ratifies the treaty and unless my colleagues and I on the Ways and Means Committee will need to advance change to the U.S. tax code as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so this doesn't get done unless we and the Senate agree with it as well, so it's important that folks are paying attention to that. We believe endorsing a deal that penalizes American innovation, that could cost American jobs, and could end up sending tax revenue to foreign countries, even as some of you suggested here in answer to Mr. Ferguson's question, even nations like China that are simultaneously attempting to steal our innovation. We don't think that's in the best interest of our constituencies. And let me ask the question, maybe Mr. Minor, is there any scenario in your estimation in which this proposal does not reduce or undercut U.S. federal revenue? Just keep in mind, half of the taxable companies are U.S. based, so this almost certainly will result in less revenue in the U.S. Do you agree with that?
Well, thank you for the question. That's a tough one for me. I would have to defer to my economist colleague.
Anyone else want to answer that?
I think JCT's analysis with the uncertainties, even with the uncertainties, the range, all of those numbers are negative. It seems likely that
in other words, there would be a reduction
in U.S.
coming
tax.
into the U.S.
Right. Even after accounting for additional revenues that could come from foreign companies, the net would be negative.
Does that make sense to you? I mean, if we're even discussing reforming taxes surrounding U.S.-based businesses, shouldn't those taxes be used to benefit U.S. citizens and not people of other countries?
I think one of the things, thank you for the question, I think one of the things inherent in this discussion is that tug and pull. Is this compromise, that reduction in U.S. tax revenue, worth it to get the certainty or the elimination of digital services taxes? And if those are questionable, then the sacrifice, in my view, is not necessarily worth it.
Yep. Ms. von Kauser, would you like to respond to that as well?
Yes, I would. And Daniel touched on this at the end, but a part of this compromise in Pillar 1 is looking at bringing together a more predictable, certain, and stable tax environment. And so the JCT report is part of the picture when it comes to considering how Congress chooses to engage with Pillar 1. But I would highlight that companies are already paying digital services taxes, and they are impactful for all companies, regardless of profit margin, but particularly for those that are loss-making or low-margin companies. And there are some jurisdictions out there that don't even have revenue thresholds, and so startups and small businesses are also directly affected by these gross revenue taxes. And so I would encourage Congress to keep that in mind when considering the compromise of Pillar 1.
We've also heard some of you in answer to questions have said that this proposal will not eliminate all possible DSTs. And so we could essentially have a situation where the Biden administration has negotiated an additional foreign tax proposal on U.S. multinational companies while failing to eliminate the digital services tax. Anybody want to respond to that?
I'd like to respond to that. As Mr. Minor noted, the amount aid document actually lists the digital service taxes that are within scope and would need to be withdrawn. And it includes all of the, should we call it first wave DSTs, UK, France, Spain, Italy, India, Turkey. I'd be very surprised if UK, France, Spain, Italy did not sign on to Amount A, and so I would be extremely confident that those DSTs would indeed be withdrawn. Canada, I'd be surprised if Canada didn't sign on, in which case it would be precluded from asserting a DST.
Do you think any country, and I'm sorry, I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, but would you foresee any situation where countries would not sign on, where a DST tax would stay in effect?
Maybe small countries. I mean, there are some very small countries with DSTs.
Thank you. I'm out of time, but appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Good line of questioning.